Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to see all you people here. My name is Eric Rossborough. I'm Associate Librarian and Senior Cataloger at the McCracken Research Library. And the question is, why am I up here at all? We're here to see the man, not Al Simpson, but Bob Richard. I spent hours interviewing Bob, and every time he talks, he pulls another story out that I didn't hear. And I was like, I can't believe you didn't tell me that story. Today, he's got a really good one, and I'm super fascinated by this story because I've read a lot about the Hoodoo Ranch. When I was young, I read about the Hoodoo Ranch, and when I moved here, I was like, that's the Hoodoo Ranch. That's owned by the Hunt family. And I knew what that was, that they were the famous oil family. Bob has been involved with the Hoodoo Ranch for years, and he is, for some biographical detail, Bob is a published author and historian, and everyone should go up to the bookstore after to get a signed copy of one of Bob's books. He's the owner and proprietor of Bob Richard Photography. He owned Grub Stake Expeditions, a Yellowstone tour company. He started guiding and cowboying at the age of 10. I could go on, but I'm not. Instead, I'm going to give you Bob Richard.
You know, it's tough to be up here in front of all of you, most of you I know, and then in walks my mentor, Alan Simpson, who led me astray from a long time ago. But what great friendships with all of you and great memories. And thank you for coming, all of you. Today was Donna Brown's funeral at 11 o'clock, and a few didn't make it today to hear. But anyway, we have got to talk about the Hoodoo Ranch today. And how do you put the Hoodoo Ranch in 1 hour? I have done the very best I can. I'll tell a few stories and memories from the time I was very young. But I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you have questions, because I called J.D. Radotkovich, our manager of the Hoodoo, to be here today to answer questions that I can't answer. And he and I still have lots of questions, but we'll do the best we can in responding to your questions. Okay, let's get started. I've had a lot of help, both from the McCracken Library, and you can see the list up there. The Park County Archives has been wonderful in supporting me on each of my talks. And Brian is here from the archives today. And again, thank you for all your help. It's been a big help. And I've borrowed from my dad's photography, and you'll see that in here. I've got a couple of photographs of JD's in there, as well as my own. This is one of the signs of the Hoodoo Ranch. I chose this over the sign on the highway. It's on the backside of the Frost Ranch. And as we go through the talk, I'll share with you the connections that my family has had with the Hoodoo Ranch since it's got started. I listed, rather than do you a handout, a history of the ranch, starting with a parent company that bought in 1948 the Hoodoo Ranch. But the history starts with Ashworth and Johnson, and they started a small cattle ranch on the Grable, and then they moved over on the Sage Creek. And in 1914, William Robertson Coe purchased the Frost Ranch first. Then he purchased the Hoodoo, and we go on down to the Billy Sleeper Ranch, and then they purchased the Pallet Ranches 1, 2, and 3, and other ranches. he brought his cousin from England to be a representative for the ranches and investments here. And that was E.V. Robertson, who you all know about. And E.V. came and looked after his interests, and W.R. Coe had a horse breeding program back east, and he brought it out here, hoping to enlarge the hearts and lungs of his horses. And he had some success, and some didn't work so well. But the one that I've seen in different magazines and newspapers is the Secretariat that won all the different horse races back there was the bloodlines came from the Hoodoo. In and it's very hard to figure out how much W.R. Coe owned and how much E.V. Robertson owned. But in 1945 to 48, actually, E.V. became our U.S. Senator in 1942. And so A.V. Robertson Coe, who was a nephew or a cousin, managed the ranch. He had worked there in the 30s prior to going to World War II. 1948, E.V. finished purchasing all of the Hoodoo, and then he sold this to H.L. Hunt in 1948. And then the Hunt ranches include 9 ranches plus others. There's over 250,000 acres of deeded and leased land. It varies year to year on the calves born and shipped, but 3,300 is a good place to start. But I don't know any rancher that could give you a real accurate count, because that's kind of like, at least my granddad told me, that's asking what's in his bank account. So I've been very careful trying not to ask, well, how many cows do you run? The way we used to do it is just count their bulls and then ask them how many bulls do they need, or one bull to how many cows, and you can figure it out that way. Anyway, in 1948, Dale Pettit from Billings, Montana, former Marine, was hired as a Hoodoo Ranch manager. His wife, Mabel, was out on horseback with him all the time and bringing livestock different places. We'll see more of that. Then he passed away, on the job, and in 1966 and 1967, George Brown from Thermopolis with his wife Donna. Oh, I wonder who that's. I can tell you whose phone that was. Anyway, Donna worked side by side with George, and there's always a good wife behind the man that's managing the ranch. He was the one that started the Charolais cattle, and at one time the Hoodoo Ranch had the largest herd of Charolais in America. That says something. 1975 or earlier, George was busy with John Elgin flying over the ranch quite a bit, and John says, it's time that you learn to fly, George. I didn't think he'd ever had flying lessons, but he did. And George had a beginner's license for years. And then when he bought his first Piper Cub, the parent company of the Hoodoo said, George, you have to get a license for insurance purposes. And he dreaded that, but he went down and passed the tests, and he got a private license and continued flying till he retired. He loved that, I think, as much as he did getting on a horse. And we all love having a good horse that worked well under you. But the Super Cub did a great job for him to observe the ranch every morning, look at how the irrigating was going in the fields. He could see the dry spots, go back, call his ranch manager and say, we need to tweak this a little bit. This is where it's dry. But it was the best tool that George had to manage all these ranches. He retired in 2010 and helped pick our current manager, J.D. Radakovich. And I'm not sure how I got connected with J.D., but right from the get-go, we met, and we did a couple of tours, and we brought the museum guests, members from here out to the ranch, and we toured part of the Hoodoo Ranch and had a great day and a big picnic out there, but we'll look at more of that. Anyway, this will all be online, so if you have a question about some of the history, you can go back and look at it, okay? I learned a lot working on this talk. This is just an excerpt that I found that Ashford and Johnson started over on the Graybull and then ended up at Sage Creek. Another story about the ownership and clarifying things, but W.R. Coe and E.V. Purchased it, and the ranch started to grow from that point. This is a photograph with Nell Smith, the governor of Wyoming. I can't figure out who the lady is. E.V. Robertson and W.R. Coe. This is taken at the Burlington Cody Inn. Another photograph inside at the Burlington Inn, actually in front of the Frost Curio, another part of my family, and they had a store there. This is E.V. Robertson's photograph when he was our U.S. Senator from 1942 through 1948. This is E.V. Robertson when he hosted Admiral Nimitz and his staff in 1946. And they visited the ranch in Cody and Yellowstone Park. And I have a book upstairs on Nimitz' visit with his staff that served with him in the Pacific. By the way, let me go back. Note the rock that they're sitting on. And last week I was out there and photographed the same rock that those gentlemen sat on. And of course the ranch house in the background. This is E.V. Robertson, Admiral Nimitz, E.V.'s wife, and their niece Twyla. And in the background you have Bradford, Admiral Byrd, and the pilot that flew this distinguished group out to Yellowstone and Cody. That is a painting that's on the front cover of my book, talking, and we found this and got the government to the Navy Department to loan it to us to use, and this was done by Ed Grigware, and he gave it to Admiral Nimitz when Nimitz visited Cody, and this was given to him at the Cody Inn. And Ed Grigware served under him in Honolulu during the war. Little history, but it all connects. This is an aerial. We'll see a lot of my dad's photographs. This is the main house. There are different barns. And the amazing thing to me, not only here but elsewhere, the barns were built to help raise the racehorses that would go back to Kentucky and elsewhere. This is another aerial taken by my dad. The ranch house down here, the barns, and I think this barn is missing now. And there's a road that goes up and across over to the Carter Ranch. But how neat that we have photographs over the years sharing this ranch with us. This is looking at the south side of the main ranch house, and many, many famous people have been there, visited, spent the night. I have so many stories that we don't have time for today. This is one of the barns, and several of the barns were insulated so that the racehorses were protected from the cold. Another barn. And this is the new hangar. Not only one, but two Super Cubs are there. And I'm not up to date on the nomenclature of these Cubs, but JD has stepped into the footsteps of George Brown very nicely. And he's out flying every day. And he can check the ranch in short time and gets to fly while he's doing it instead of having to get on a horse. And I think that's made his life a lot easier. But he can visit the whole ranch, which is spread all over Park County. But he's got the hangar. He put his aircraft in there, and he still uses the road as his landing strip. This was taken by and shared by JD as he's taking off from the landing strip, and you can see the hangar back here. And that's Carter Mountain. That, to me, says it all of the new manager of the ranch, and he's not new. He's been with us 12 years and continues with the same quality leadership that we've had with the other two managers. And what a treat to be able to go out and look at your whole ranch and be back in an hour or two. You know, just has to remember to put fuel in that thing so he doesn't have a low altitude emergency. George did lots and lots of stories as I've researched about his flying. And I asked John Elgin, I said, did you really teach him to fly? John did not answer me. This is the front of the sign on the Frost Ranch as you're going into the Hoodoo. And that relates back to my family, the Frosts and Richards. And this is where Ned Frost, at the age of 6, started with his father, Malin Frost. And it was a stage stop on the way to Meeteetse. This is one of my favorite photographs, looking at Carter Mountain from the Frost Ranch. And every time I go up to the Hoodoo or the Frost Ranch, I always get a different view, but this is very special to me, is Carter Mountain. These are old photographs taken during the frost time. And this is the original stage stop here. And these have burned down and are gone. And that's the Frost Rancho. But very famous people spent a lot of time there. And it was burned. But Ernest Seton Hall wrote the book on Wob, the grizzly bear. You had Owen Wister that spent time writing The Virginian, and Emerson Haug, The Girl at the Halfway House, and used Frost's daughter Daisy as a heroine of the book. If you read these books, you can visualize and see that The Virginian really took place right here at the Hoodoo and the Frost Ranch, not down at Medicine Bow. But it's worthwhile to read these. And this is Ned Frost. This is in the early teens, and his brother Jesse, who was older. And I always note when I'm watching the Hollywood movies, very seldom do you see the rifles slung on the left side. And when I was a kid, I was watching some of the Roy Roger movies and what have you. I slung my rifle scabbard on the other side one day, and my granddad got a hold of me and he says, "You get that back on the left side." I says, "What difference does it make?" He says, "When you're getting off a horse, you want to be able to put your hand on that rifle and pull it out of the scabbard as you get off your horse. If it's on the other side, you're not going to reach it." And he says, "You carry your rope over there." But watch the Western movies and you'll see the difference. But this is the way I was raised to carry my saddle gun as I hunted in this country. This is taken looking down on the house that was built by the Ned Frost, and this is the old stage stop here. Most of these buildings are now gone, but they still use this, and they have one of the ranch managers here. These are cattle coming up the lane. There's a road that goes in here now, but it gives you an idea what was going on in 1910. This is a photograph out on the Hoodoo of my granddad, and look at the size of those antelope. But this was when my granddad, Fred Richard, and Ned Frost formed a partnership, hunted for the railroad, and then went into the outfitting business, both hunting and taking trips to Yellowstone. And there are books upstairs about that. Now, lo and behold, at the archives, I came across this photograph. This is Chew Frost. This is my father. And I think this is Kid Nichols. This is Charlie Bradford, his wife. Bob Richard, who was Chip and Chan's dad. And this is Ned. And they had ridden over from North Fork to spend the day bringing the Bradfords over because they'd heard so much about the Hoodoo Ranch and the horses. Charlie Bradford was one of the first movie producers and produced movies over on Cottonwood Creek, just north of Cody. But this is in front of one of the barns at the Hoodoo Ranch. This is Ned Frost, and I used to tell people when I'd show them these pictures, that was the leg of one of the larger dinosaurs. And they bought it, but that's actually a tree. And this is out in Marlar Basin, and I think it's been picked apart by numerous collectors. This is a stone house that's out there, and still pretty well put together. And here's somebody looking at some of the broken pieces of tree. Then we're going to go over the hill to the Carter Ranch, and that is an important part of the Hoodoo. And this is a Wiley Ditch tunnel, and that has been used for storage. It was never used for water of grain and that type thing. And a few times they've had grizzly bears break into it and really feed up on their feed, but they no longer use it. But it's still quite a historic landmark, seeing these tunnels that were built when the Wiley Ditch was being built. The Bear Creek Ranch, and that's part of the Hoodoo. And notice the hay that they put up there, and in the past they've been calving there, and but they have enough hay to feed them. And haying and cutting hay, irrigating takes a lot of time, and different ranch managers to ensure they get that produced. This is looking from the ranch, looking towards Cedar and Rattlesnake Mountain and the canyon. This is looking into the Bear Creek Ranch itself. This is the original house here. They've added here, and to the right over here, they just took down another ranch house and are rebuilding it, and they're trying to put things back as they were, but with new materials and keeping the historic part of the ranches. And you can look from that ranch and see the snow horse with the rains. They haven't quite melted yet. And I learned from my granddad that when those rains melt, then you can get into the thoroughfare. And it's a pretty good guideline, although we always took a big scoop shovel with us when we went in on our first trip to the thoroughfare to get through some of the drifts. Sleeper Ranch belonged to Billy Sleeper, and they raised a lot of sheep down there. Sheep sheds are still there, and they get a lot of hay, that type of production out of that. And growing up, I got to visit most of these ranches, but I had never gotten to the Pallet One, and that was A.A. Anderson's home that he built. And this sign, J.D.'s son painted, and J.D. has several children. One son's playing football at the University of Wyoming, and if they're playing at home, you're not going to find J.D. up here. He's down watching his son. And anyway, J.D. took me out to the ranch, and what a day I had that day. We had snow, blizzard, and snowy roads, no problems, but what a treat to visit this ranch, because the Frosts and Chew Frost would bring horses all the way from the North Fork, bring them through the Hoodoo and over the Pallet One where they started their pack trips. And he also trucked them over there, but we didn't at that time, this was in the 50s, have the Jack Creek trailhead. And so the Hoodoo and Dale Pettit said, come on through the ranch and use our corrals and get started from there. And this went over a period of years. But all the managers have tried to work with the community, work with the federal government, both the forest and the BLM, and other agencies, county. And it's a big job to try and manage the ranch and work with all the different agencies. I'm not sure how they do it. Before I visited the ranch, I really had sort of a sour opinion of A.A. Anderson, but he was the first superintendent of what we now know as the Shoshone National Forest. He did it for 7 years, and he had all the forests around Yellowstone Park. He had men working for him in different areas, and his biggest problem were the sheepmen from Utah bringing the sheep over and coming into the forest or the Yellowstone timberlands, and they were setting fires in the forests. And then the next year they'd bring their sheep back, and they had fresh grass and weeds to feed their sheep. And he put a stop to it. He says, you're not bringing your sheep back. And he did stop it. And I went online and got A.A. Anderson's autobiography. And in 2 nights, I finished it. And wow, what a guy. I mean, and I'll show you a little bit more, but he was a great artist and had shows in Paris and in New York, elsewhere. But not only was he an artist, he loved this country. He started the Pallet Ranch, and he was part of the people in this country. He brought the Prince of Monaco over here and worked with Bill Cody, and my granddad guided the Prince on a 3-week hunt. All these men were connected and worked together. It's a very small world, and trust me, doing this talk, I learned a lot more, and reading A.A. Anderson's book is worthwhile if you can go down the archives or come here and borrow or read the book, I was fascinated, and I found that I agreed with A. Anderson on just a whole lot of stuff that otherwise he was just one of our history. But anyway, that's when he was our supervisor. This is A. Anderson's house at the Palette. Up here is where he had his art studio. Notice the bison heads. JD has gone in and refurbished this house, and it is as original as it can be, but it's all pretty much new. The Hunt brothers come out here and other members of the Hunt company for vacations. It's a hideaway for them now, but what a beautiful spot. And these buffalo heads are taken down now and put away and put back out every spring. It's kind of a treat, I think. This I took during the snowstorm a couple of weeks ago. Notice the buffalo skulls have been put away for the winter. And it hasn't changed much, but the Hoodoo has tried to keep everything as it was and maintain the history. And I think that's when you've got 9 ranches and ranch houses and trying to figure out what's right. But JD took me in, and this is the dining room. Look at the fireplace and the date. This is a crystal fireplace that's in a bedroom, and A. Anderson had a crystal mine. And this is all crystal, but everything is, it was back in that day, but it's been refurbished, clean. I mean, not a speck of dust. And we had lunch there in the kitchen, and it was a real treat for me. That's a trap door. That's in the bathroom. A. Anderson was not popular with the sheepmen, even in this country, because he got them off the forest and put restrictions on where the different sheep herds could go or that type of thing. And he ended up putting bars on his windows, and he dug or had a tunnel dug to another building. And this was his escape route. They tried to burn his house down one time and got some of it done. But the history is still there. Books are still there. It's what a treat it was that day. This is the Palette 2, looking through the gate. This is one of the horse barns for raising, and they were insulated horse barns. It wasn't the day to go look at all these things, but apparently E.V. Robertson insulated them and did everything he could do to help with the mares and their foaling. The Palette 3 is further down on the Grable, and they raise lots and lots of hay down there. But it kind of gives you a look to the north, or no, that's to the west. But anyway, one of the many ranches. These are some of the livestock. I believe this is a Red Angus. Charlet, and she's been preg tested. I mean, think about all the livestock that you've got to go through and check, and the ones you ship. And here's the branding, and Carter Mountain in the background. I took this the other day, a steer that's getting fed up and putting a little weight on before he's shipped. And the earmark has always been a very important part of our ranches in this country, because herds of different owners are mixed together, and when they're haired over, you can't find the brand as quickly as you can an earmark. And the earmark helped you pick out your cows if you were in the gather. This I found out of one of the books. Hoodoo Land and Cattle Company has become one of the most influential and respected cattle operations in the West. It's world known. They had sheep, and during Dale Pettit's time, they got out of the sheep business as the government got involved with the poisoning and stopping the poisoning of the coyotes and that type of thing. But they ran 3 or 4 bands of sheep with a herder with each band of sheep, and that was a big job. That's looking at Carter Mountain at the background. This is Cody in the center. And I think that, I don't know what that is. Thank you, hospital, but they're being shipped and sold. This is A.V. Robertson Co., and he worked at the Hoodoo and before World War II, served in the Army, came back, and was the ranch manager while E.V. was in our U.S. Senate. And so this is a start of ranch managers. Next is Dale Pettit, and Dale came out of Billings. He was a World War II Marine, and he involved lots and lots of the local cowboys working at the ranch, and he and his wife were on horseback a lot of the time. Dad was out photographing them. And then I learned from J.D. that he was also quite an artist. And I never knew Dale as an artist, but his artwork, I think, is amazing. And one of those hidden secrets that you don't know about a man, even though you've known him during his tenure here in Cody. But he has quite a bit of artwork and very interesting. These are some of the cowboys out on the ranch, and they're wintertime. This is by the Frost Ranch, and trying to use a sled and get the hay rack out to feed cattle. Cold, miserable. This is one of Dad's favorite photographs. Look at the frost, and those old ponies earned their keep that day. Here they were gathering the cows and selling the Herefords, and they were going to introduce Charolais. This was bringing cattle in from the ranch. Apparently, they were also having to brand some calves. This is coming down the hill where the Ivy is today. Bill, this is right where your hotel is, Best Western, and that is designated as a cattle drive. And 8th Street is still designated as a cattle drive. But when Hoodoo did it, and other ranchers, believe me, the people living along there were very upset when the steers or the cows got into their gardens. And we had the head of the highway department, Bill Loper, that opened up his garage and got a steer in there. And then he called Dale Pettit and said, well, what do you want to trade? They worked it out. But anyway, a lot of growling. But notice the difference today and look at it then. Well, have to point it in the right direction here. That's 8th Street back in the probably early 50s. And Sunset Motel here. And that's looking south. This is later, after the causeway was put in over Sulphur Creek and taking cattle over to the depot and to the pens that were right here. This is going between the hospital, who W.R. Coe helped build back in the early or late 30s, and they're headed to market. That's crossing the Kogel Bridge. Down here is where the old bridge was. There's the Burlington Cody Inn. This is the depot. And right down here is where the cattle pens were. This is in the pens. You can see the depot up here and the end of the railroad. Cedar, Shoshone Canyon, and Rattlesnake. This is when they were all through, and Charlie Blackstone, who just passed away here about a year ago, and Dale Pettit and his wife Mabel, and there are several others, and I just don't remember their names, and I tried to find them. They were from Powell, but that's the crew that brought them out from the Hoodoo, one of Dad's photographs. And here's George Brown, 43 years out at the Hoodoo. And amazing the stories that I get when I have been researching and talking to people. And I bet you could share some that I haven't heard. But Dale was a leader, George is a leader, and we're lucky to have JD as that same type of leader that can manage ranches, work with people. I'm always amazed how they can keep track of all of it. George in his younger years, and this is my favorite with JD and George turning the reins over at the ranch, and we had a tour with members of the museum here, and that was another great day at the Hoodoo. JD with two of his sons and the memorial to the previous managers. And I think that's where we picked up our silverware for dinner. And this was our introduction to JD, talking about what he was going to do and bringing new thoughts and ideas, which have been very successful to the ranch. This was the bus we used with one of the barns in the background. And what a treat that the museum sponsored that with the Hoodoo. This is JD, and that other fellow is now a guide for grubstake expeditions and tours, but he was ahead of the BLM, Mike Stewart, here in town. And he and JD were showing me how to drive my four-wheel drive Suburban up a hill when I couldn't get it up in high. And they had to show me what buttons to punch. It wasn't getting out and turning the knobs on the wheels. But with a lot of help and technical help, we made it. That's, what reservoir is that? Ferguson, isn't it? Ferguson. But you can see Hart Mountain in the background, and that's all Hoodoo land. And here's JD. I don't think he has quite as much dark hair today as he did 12 years ago, but that's his office, and the office hasn't changed a bit, except the people, and they can put their fingers on almost anything there. But he looks a little serious. He doesn't get that serious anymore. Carter Mountain, the landmark of the Hoodoo Ranch, and I think that's true today as it was then. This is one of my favorite photographs with the cattle and the change in how they're breeding cattle. But that's taken by the Frost Ranch looking to the west. And there's that airplane that keeps popping up. If you took that airplane away from JD today, he'd be lost. It's like when you take a good horse away from you. And I know he loves to fly, and he loves to fly slow and low, but he's got to be careful. But he has already gotten that lecture from me. But he shared this photograph with me, one of my favorites. And I did it in less than an hour, and we have time for questions. And if we can turn up the lights a little, or we don't need to turn the lights up, but thank you. Anybody with questions?
Who has a question? I'll give you the mic, and you can say the question into the mic so we can record this for posterity.
Bob, what is the meaning of the pallet ranches?
The Pallet Ranch, A.A. Anderson was an artist, and a great artist, in France, where he learned to be an artist, and in New York, and he had lots of showings. And the pallet was his tool that he used when he was an artist, that he put his paints on, and he took the outline of that, and that became one of the brands that they use. Does that answer your question? Any other questions? JD, you're welcome to come up here and sit down, and maybe they'll ask you some questions.
Hi, Bob. Where does the name Hoodoo Ranch come from?
Well, there's a Hoodoo Creek, and I'll let JD tell you where it is because he flies over it all the time. I don't know where the Hoodoo Creek is, but he's going to show me, he promised.
It's right behind my house.
Is it right behind your house?
It goes right by the Hoodoo Ranch.
Okay.
It's the drainage in those old historical photographs is the Hoodoo Creek. And the hoodoo is a geological formation. And there's plenty of hoodoos out there in the sandstone or around the headquarters there. And I think that's why it's named Hoodoo Creek and then Hoodoo Ranch.
Any other questions?
Anybody have a question for JD or Bob?
JD, how much of the land holdings are leased by the Hoodoo? And like say out in the McCullough Peaks, that sort of place?
Well, total of the 250,000 acres roughly that we operate on, 100,000 acres of that is private. The majority of that's around Carter Mountain. That's the biggest block. McCullough Peaks, the private up on top of that is probably about 15 to 20,000 acres, plus or minus, I think. I mean, that's ballpark. Of the leased land, we have about 30,000 acres of state land lease, about 35 to 40,000 acres of Forest Service lease, and the remainder of the lease is all BLM. And that goes from the top of McCullough Peaks south all the way to the Grable River. All that Wayuu Bench country and a lot of Oregon Basin is our BLM leases.
Water is always a problem on some of those leases. But you've developed that too since you've been here. George did a lot of it.
Of those original ranches, how was some of those big properties acquired? I mean, through like the homestead, I mean, you could only get like 160 acres. Was there a means for some of those original ranches to be a lot bigger than that?
Well, I can tell you from my family that settled on the North Fork, my granddad bought some of the homesteads, and he and Ned moved up there. And then my dad, my uncle, my grandmother, Ned Frost's wife, and their 3 children all homesteaded. So each one of those were either 140 or 160 acres. And what they did is homestead where the springs are. And that's the development of the ranches. If you read the book on the Two Dot, the rancher that came out and brought cows, over 8,000 cows, he had 40 riders, and he put his riders out on every spring that was coming out of the ground and had them homestead, helped them build a house, helped them build corrals and a barn. And once they proved up on it and he was paying them, then he bought that homestead from them to add to the ranch. And that's what they did with the Pallet Ranch, with the Sleeper Ranch, and other ranches on the Hoodoo, but all that was done and over with probably before W.R. Coe bought most of it. And if there was some that they could homestead, they went ahead and did it. I did not research the homesteads that were added. Does that answer your question?
Well, Bob, let me, this is Al here. My father was about 90, and George invited Dad, and I tagged along. I was just a little boy. And took him through the whole history of the shower house and the George is smiling. The only thing wrong with George, that's not George. It looks like George. We just came from Donna's funeral, both of us. That was this morning. That he described the whole thing. The pallet had a swimming pool in the form of a pallet with coal-fired warmth in the summer, and then he had a dormitory, and that's where he kept some of the models. And if you look at the streams and the names of the creeks, it's Betty Creek, Vicky Creek, and then of course the map makers failed to complete the one. It's called Warhouse Creek. And let me tell you, that's and then he painted the portrait of Thomas Edison in the Smithsonian Institution. It's there today in the American wing. It says A.A. Anderson. He was an amazing man. The only thing wrong with J.D. is he played ball for the CSU Rams.
Other questions for Bob or Al or anyone for that matter? JD?
Al, I'm surprised. I'm sure you could tell us some more stories. Usually, Alan has gone on a lot of the tours with his family, and if I give him the mic, I usually can't get it back, and he does a better job than I. But anyway, thank you all for coming today, and we will be here a few minutes afterwards.
We'll see you upstairs at the bookstore where Bob will be signing of his oeuvre for you to purchase. Thank you.